Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the monastery, the open bar of the internet, the world's greatest shit show, and the place where we, the good brothers and sisters of this most holy of temples, seek enlightenment through the drunkest, craziest, and most batshit ways possible. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me, I have a couple of returning good brothers to the temple. The double-headed monster of interaction games, Travis Hauser and Seth Schrum, the co-developers of the Altered World experience, which they've visited this temple before for that, and now back for the Beer and Pretzels kit, currently on Drive Thru RPG. How are you two doing today?
Doing great. Yourself?
I am doing good. I am having a bit of a laugh at some of my colleagues who do not quite know how to handle the cold. Some of which have been in my region for a long time, but still end up overcompensating when it gets just a little bit chilly. Like, we're not even at the worst of it yet. We're not in January yet, and already I'm seeing people act like it's the snowpocalypse or something. Talk to me in 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah, down here in Texas, we're having a bit of a cold snap. I think it got into the mid 40s today, Fahrenheit for the international crowd.
Which, if I look at where it's at on my end, it is 22.
No, thank you.
Yeah, 22, and I consider that warm.
Yeah.
I mean, it's supposed to warm up a bit tomorrow, going up into the 30s, but actually right now the feels like, if you factor in wind chill, is 12.
Yeah.
That's good hot chocolate weather.
Yeah. Some people might call it sleeping weather.
Hibernation weather, even.
Yeah.
But now, last time I had you guys on, it was covering what was the state of the core book for the Altered World experience. And back in October, you released a starter set, I guess you call the Beer and Pretzels kit. Is this meant to be like a on the ground introduction to the system?
Yeah, that's right. It's a free to play with some pre-generated characters and an adventure that has everything you need in order to go through the adventure, right? Like everything you need except, I think, dice.
Yeah, you can think of it as kind of like a digital box set.
Mm-hmm. I can get that, since you do have a player and GM PDF for the thing, combat tracker you made into an Excel sheet, and a full set of maps and cut-ins as needed.
Yeah, and then that's all that's in there. And then there's a couple of other things. There's in the game master sheet. There's we give like a game master, a printable game master screen, or for one of the loadable ones. And then there's a quick play guide sheet for the players as well that has kind of a listing of the core mechanics of the system. So it's almost like a player-facing game master screen, so that they can have that with them. So that, because we realize, in this, the customers for this product are both the game master and the players are new to it, right? And so they both are going to need a set of reference material to kind of wrap their heads around the system.
Yeah, especially since instead of doing the typical approach to initiative and turn order, you're doing a phase system, which I think depending on someone's background is going to be easier or trickier to grasp immediately.
Yeah,
we find that there is a bit of a learning curve with it, but it's not too steep, right? Like once you kind of go around it a few times, it seems to make sense to folks and they get it. Mm-hmm. But I think the defining characteristic there is that in our response system, you have an advantage by having a higher response. So we reflect that by having the player who wins initiative, who gets the best response result, they get to declare their actions last, because that means that they've heard what everybody else is going to do and they can take that into account. Mm-hmm. And then everything gets resolved at once, as opposed to I hit you, I hit you, I hit you. It allows for some more strategic thinking.
Yeah, and I think I was actually just today given some information for a group that I'm going to be running through this adventure on Friday, and it occurred to me to express it this way, right? The two things that people are probably going to have the biggest hang-ups with is what you've talked about, response, because they are conditioned that winning initiative means I get to go first, as opposed to in our system, it's everyone declares actions, so I get to declare last, just like Seth talked about. The other thing is a function of action economy being a little different. People are used to thinking of action economy in terms of how much can I do in a turn, right? How many actions can I take in a turn? Whether it's an attack action, a bonus action, and a movement, like whatever, right? That's what people are coming to us from. And with our system, much like with response, where it's a little bit reversed, it's more a factor of how many turns does my action take? And what it does add a little bit of complexity, but it does provide I think a little bit more realistic approach to how combat works, and it allows for like combat in real life, like if you're really fighting, and then just the idea that certain actions just take longer to complete. Now, what's interesting is when where this starts to feel weird is because our combat timekeeping is different. People are probably, most of our players are going to have some experience with D&D, where you have each turn, at least conceptually, represents 6 seconds of time in the game. Well, each of our phases represents a single second of time. And so there is this kind of perception of, I can't do as much, right? But when in reality, if you look at the same 6 seconds of time, an altered world character, especially because we've been doing a little bit of refinement of the rules and we're working on an update to the Beer and Pretzels kit based on some playtesting. But an altered world character in 6 seconds of combat time could move 45 meters and make potentially six attacks without having any kind of extra attacks as feats or traits or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so it actually ends up where you can actually do more in the same amount of time. It's just a matter of we're looking at time in smaller chunks. And so once you can wrap your brain around that my turn or this turn that we're doing only represents a single second of time, it does start to make a little bit more sense. The other thing that that Seth talked about with regards to response that I think is really, really interesting is the mechanics of how we execute a combat turn, right? A single phase. Everyone that's involved in the combat declares what their action is going to be in that phase. And then you go through and you make whatever dice rolls need to be made for defensive actions, and you make whatever dice rolls need to be made for offensive actions. And then you compare the numbers, and the game master crafts a narrative line of what happened in this 1 second of time. And the reason we do it that way is it allows character players to take actions that directly affect the success of other people's actions in the same moment. And so it allows for a lot more combat options. But what's interesting is, one, it 100% eliminates the issue of players sitting there waiting for their turn and then having to catch back up to what's going on the battlefield, and then make their decision. And what I have found is even before we've made some of the kind of mechanical changes that we're looking at, even before implementing those, it is much faster. I ran a session of this at a con just a month ago, and I had 4 players at the table fighting. They were actively fighting 4 combatants, and then there were 4 non-combatants involved in the scenario. So there were 12 characters engaging in the combat, and we went through a total of 8 rounds or 8 phases of combat, so only representing 8 seconds. We went through 8 phases of combat, and it took us less than an hour to get through that full thing with 12 combatants or 12 interactive characters. And I know if I'd been playing D&D, that would have been a full 3-hour session to go through 8 rounds of combat. It just would have been, because of the way the system works. And so it is a little bit different, and it does require a little bit of effort to wrap your brain around it, but the benefit is real.
And when it comes to that, especially when you're dealing with a phase design, there is the issue that can come up with that I've seen in some games that do a phase approach of players that end up going a bit defensive. Is that something that you've had an issue with, or are people largely I guess aggressive is not exactly the right word, but it's close enough.
Yeah, they're taking more attack actions. Yeah, I think that's a good question, and it's fair, right? So far in our experience in recent playtests, I haven't seen too many people embrace the defensive actions that they can take. But having those options there gives player agency, and that's a big thing for us, right? To let people kind of control their fate as much as possible. If you're in a fight and you fight defensively, if you don't take the initiative, so to speak, and you don't do things to move the fight along, you're probably going to have a hard time winning that. Like, you have to be tactical and strategic in the way you approach conflict. So you have options, but not all options might be good in all situations. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I could.
Yeah, and
I could see that.
I think the other side of this too, I will tell you, at this point, I think I've run about 35 new players through this game. And I don't know that I've seen anyone actually utilize the defensive actions that other than a playtest session where Seth was actually one of the players. And I think it's because I actually believe it's a thing because they're not doing it because they don't immediately catch on that it's something you can do. Right? I think so many people are coming from games where your defense is a static number. And it's like, I have an armor class. I don't have to worry about defensive actions. And so our system doesn't do that, right? Whether or not you get hit has nothing to do with anything on your character sheet. It has to do with whether or not the person attacking you was successful in their attack. You can do things to make that harder for them, but attacks are determined by the attack. A successful attack is determined by the attacker, not the defender. And so I think it is just a paradigm shift, right? I think there are ways in which you can use defensive actions really, really cool that produce some really cinematic moments. The time I was talking about where Seth, he was playing a character that was built to have extra actions as part of their action economy. By, they paid for the trait and had that ability. And we realized, we'd never really thought about it in this term before, but we realized there's literally nothing stopping you from using those extra actions to take multiple defensive actions in the same phase. And so his character was getting ganged up on by like 5 or 6 SWAT team guys, 3 of whom were shooting at him and 3 of whom were trying to hit him with sticks. And he ended up using a defensive action against both melee and ranged. And it ended up looking, conceptually being kind of a Matrix moment where his character's just dodging around all of these attacks. And I don't think he even got hit. It was a really interesting way to do it. Yeah. And so it's just an option that I think people are not necessarily used to having.
Yeah. Now with that kind of thing in mind, something that I find kind of interesting, just looking at the archetypes that you have on hand. Mm-hmm. Aside from the fact that it looks a lot cleaner than what I had last time. Is the fact that you in a certain way you are doing something similar to the likes of Traveler and the like, where there isn't a unified health setup, but health is tied to attributes, which is going to lean into that kind of lethality. Was that intention to go with of high power, high lethality?
Combat is serious business. Yeah. You take your life into your hands when you get into combat. Their level means something very different in this game. And so, if you want to think about it in terms people might be more familiar with, the kobold is always going to be a threat to the heavily armored paladin, right? There's just a chance that scrawny little monster thing can slice that femoral artery or, claw out your throat or whatever it is that little guy's trying to do. So it's unlikely, but there's a chance, We've got combat design that you should take it seriously and not get into a fight that you don't have to get into.
Yeah. I will also say that, you're looking at the character sheets that are in the Beer and Pretzels kit right now. We, as part of our rules refinement, we've cleaned up a little bit what you're talking about there with this kind of stratification. We realized that while we, on the one hand, we like the very quantified system and we recognize that appeals to a certain portion of the market. that frankly is probably being underserved currently. There are players out there that want a crunchy game that don't, that the new games aren't leaning that direction most of the time. But we also realized that I sat down and realized it while I was running a session. At any given point, there were something like 7 different potential sources of modifiers to your action rolls. And it just got to where, as a game master, I realized I was forgetting things simply because there were too many different places to look. And so we've done a little bit to tighten that down. Partly we've done a little bit of a dice mechanic change, but we've also just gone from, if you're looking at the character sheet, right? Like you've got health in 4 tiers on the character sheet that you're looking at. And we've taken that down to 2 tiers. So now the idea is that you have the first 75% of your health doesn't induce any kind of penalties. And then once you're down into that bottom 25% is when you start to get a little bit of a penalty. It's an abstraction. And we're probably going to leave the old way in and just call it hard mode for people who want to play with a little bit more defined death spiral. But we've done that specifically to just kind of take that, make it so that it's not quite so modifier intensive, for lack of a better term, right?
Yeah, I could definitely see that. In my experience, when it comes to games that are leaning more into the crunchy side of things, I think there were a lot of games that very much lean into crunchy simulationism in the 90s. A lot of them didn't stick around, and I think the reason is because they, not to put too fine a point on it, they focus on the wrong things. They were so focused on trying to be as realistic as possible that you end up with those offensively long skill lists, or end up with wound tables.
Offensively long skill lists. I like that.
Yeah.
I think you're onto something, right? That's something we think about a lot. This tension between showing realism in a system that lets you do combat. This is just an imagination game, and then we're throwing all kinds of rules in there to make it fair and have some structure. And so we can devise a set of rules that will get us very close to realism. It's just that it becomes so complex that it's not fun anymore.
I'd like
right?
to throw in a term that I've used as one of my mantras. Believability over realism.
Yeah.
That's good. I like that.
I suppose in a certain way it's a Zen koan, because it's I came up with the term after I remembered the tagline of the original Superman movie. You will believe that a man can fly. And I went with this idea that the audience wants to be tricked. They want to be carried along. As long as you present that thing that even at its most unrealistic, if you present it a certain way, people are going to go along with it.
I really like that. Yeah, I think you're exactly right. People want to have that experience, and they're willing to carry some of the mental load to help make that happen. So make it believable over realistic. That's really good. And in our own way, I think we came to something very similar, right? Like I was saying, there is this tension between the realism aspect, but also the playability, the flow of the game. And we're trying to find that sweet spot where you have a real or believable kind of interaction going on without getting bogged down into too many rules. So did we hit that sweet spot? Man, we hope so.
Yeah. I think one of the things that we've done that helps with that, and you bring up this point that there were a lot of really super crunchy games back in the 90s. I remember those. And I think one of the things that caused a lot of them to die was there were lots of games, and Rollmaster comes to mind in particular as being really bad for this. There were lots and lots of games where you had to consult tables, multiple tables, in the course of adjudicating an attack.
Yeah,
right.
I covered
and
Rollmaster.
we have been.
I covered Rollmaster years ago when I was doing a retrospective on Lord of the Rings games. So I specifically covered which is a simplified Rollmaster, but
yeah. I remember Merc first edition.
I'd covered first and second because there wasn't the differences between the two of them weren't significant enough to separate it. But one of the things that I pointed out was it was still within that wargame bad habit of a collection of subsystems for different scenarios, as opposed to something that we would see as the years went on of one unified mechanic with a bunch of different variables instead of a bunch of miniature mechanics for different scenarios.
Yeah, and we've been pretty aggressive. Our system had some of that stuff in it, right? And when we first started working with it, and we've been pretty aggressive about removing the need to reference a table in gameplay. I think we've still got like 1 or 2 instances where it's there, but we're working to either simplify that or eliminate it if possible. I'm not really sure how it would work to eliminate it based on what it gives. But I think if we can get it down to like there's 2 tables that are on the Game Master screen, I'll be able to be okay with that. I don't want to lose what those 2 tables give us, but it's still been a pet peeve of mine to try to eliminate all of that if we can, because it just slows things down.
Yeah, I've seen as bad as and as infamous as Rollmaster is when it comes to that particular issue. They're not even my biggest whipping boy when it comes to that. That goes to every Fantasy Games Unlimited game I ever saw, and I saw quite a few of them.
Yeah,
and that's also where I came up with the term offensively long skill lists, because some of the specificity of skill lists in some games back then and some more recent ones was a bit excessive, where an individual skill might be so situational that you might go whole campaigns and not use it. Like who the hell is actively going to put points in basket weaving? Except for the most specific of circumstances. And when I say specific, I mean threading the eye of a needle in a sack of other needles. Yeah,
I mean that's a fair criticism, and we have 1 or 2 that I think 1 or 2 talents that I think fall into that category. In particular, the one that comes to mind is we have a talent. It's called business, and there's a number of different ways it could be used in the game. But there's a sub skill that you can kind of specialize into in there. That's broker, and it's literally just investing, and it ends up having essentially a mini game that you can play in between. You can roll some dice in between sessions or whatever. It's not something I would want to do in the session at the table, and we're holding on to it for now because it was there, and what we like about having it is it points to the idea that our game isn't about combat, and that, like, I joke that our game is one of the only ones where you can have a literal demon in a party with a literal librarian and it works, and you can tell cool stories within that menu. And so it's one of those that I recognize there's probably a lot of players that are going to skip right over that and no one's going to use it. But at the end of the day, it's in the book. It takes up about 3 inches of space at most, and I'm willing to leave it in for the player who's like, hey, I think it would be cool as part of my backstory to be an investment banker. And then maybe there's a way that can factor into the narrative,
Yeah. I think the issues alleviated to a point because of the emphasis on packages.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the ways I look at that is players tell you the story they're interested in part through the characters they build, right? So if at character creation, a player is like, I'm going to put a whole bunch of points into environmental sciences, which is a talent I'm like, could we get rid of the environmental sciences talent? Like, who's playing role-playing games to do, I don't know, environmental surveys of the wetlands of, the wild side somewhere? But somebody might want to do that. And if they do that, I think part of the contract between the player characters and the game master is to talk about that, right? Like, hey, I'm running a campaign and I don't see a whole lot of use for environmental sciences. Yes, that talent's there, but you might be better served to spend your points somewhere else. No, I really want to do that. And the game master should probably come up with ways to put that into the game because the player is expressing an interest in it, right? And I think I come back to this over and over again. I beat this drum a lot. This hobby is about collaborative storytelling, right? And so it is a collaboration. It's not a one-way street where the game master is just telling the players, this is the story that you're going to play. It's the one that I came up with or the module I bought and prepared. You've got to take your cues from the players as well and be willing to collaborate to come up with a story that pleases everybody, even if that has aspects in it no other person in the collaboration would have imagined or anticipated.
Mm-hmm. And
yeah,
I think when it comes to that collaborative storytelling mindset, I look at that as a consequence of tabletop RPGs drifting further and further away from being a war game with extra steps and into its own identity.
Yeah,
I know some people really hate the whole storytelling focus and want to lean into that whole war game campaign mindset, but that mindset it has its place. But one of the big lies that I think the tabletop community, regardless of generation, tells themselves is that there's some royal road to this.
There's some what to it?
Royal road. Some one size fits all approach. Even universal
aren't
one size fits all, because your games like GURPS or Hero are still going to have a high, well, not a high floor, but certainly higher than others. Especially GURPS, where you might have multiple session zeros. And I'm not sure if you guys do this, but I have a habit of writing out a primer before I do a campaign. That primer is a treatment that's usually only a couple pages, giving a bit of a premise of the adventure, what the tone is going for, what to focus on, what to avoid. One of the more famous examples I give is when I was running Lex Arcana, which I actually think you guys would enjoy. And I specifically said right out of the gate, the campaign we're doing is an investigative-focused one. Do not think Spartacus. Yeah. Do not think Gladiator. Think X-Files. Think Fringe, and you're going to be closer to the mark. I won't stop you from making a combat-heavy character, but don't come crying to me when you make that combat-heavy character and you don't have as much to do, because I did warn you.
Right. Well, and I mean, it's that idea of a primer, right? Like I'm game mastering for our group playing just 5th edition, but there were some things that I wanted to explore within the setting of, within this kind of narrative focus, but still kind of maybe pull back some of the things that we've kind of tossed to the side a little bit with some of the exploration of the wilderness. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, hey, this campaign has this overall narrative arc. This is where it's set. It's going to be feature relatively heavily with interacting with the environment. And so you're going to need somebody in the party is probably going to need this, survival or whatever, just because it's going to be important. If you don't have it, you're going to have a real hard time. And that goes to the players, and then the collaborative side of it is the players. It was actually really funny. I gave this kind of written session 0, this primer, like you talked about, and the players immediately started talking about making this party that was all themed around cheese, and it was really funny. But I was like, I had to come to him and say, hey, look, if this is what you want to play, we'll do that. But these characters don't work for the story that I have. I'll need to come up with something else. And we'll do whatever. And they decided that they wanted to wanted to do the story that I had already in mind. And we've been having a lot of fun with it. But I think that back and forth before the storytelling starts sets the tone, right? And is super important.
And there's a reason why one of the first parts of an opera is the overture. The overture is there to set the tone of what you're about to sit through like 4 hours, or in the case of
right.
The Ring of the Nibelungen, 20 hours.
Right.
Fortunately, not in one sitting. Nobody's gonna do that. It's usually spread out over the course of a week. For the sake of the sanity of the actors and for the sanity of the audience. But within that, something that I did find, something that I have found amusing is the setup when it comes to powers, the aid system, as it were. And what I find amusing with this is the fact that each of the archetypes you could say is some varying form of Gish. Are you familiar with?
And that's a term I'm not super familiar. You're talking about somebody who's got powers and combat. Is that right? Like a martial. Caster mix.
That's one way to go about it, but it's more that characters are a degree of multi-role. The term The term Gish came from a nickname that was given to the Githzerai and Githyanki when they first showed up in Fiend Folio, and it kind of spread out to those characters who do a little bit. Started with a little bit of casting, a little bit of fighting, but it's expanded into just multi-role characters in general.
Yeah.
And I certainly get that vibe with some characters a little more than others, but there's also the fact that that with the power setup there isn't a whole lot of preparation or utilizing a certain resource aside from praying that you have the favor of the dice gods, which you're going to be doing that anyways. They're not going to be listening.
Yeah, that's we acknowledge that, like, one of the things that's different is that in our game, essentially every spell, for lack of a better term, is a cantrip. You can just spam it. The biggest thing you've got is that different Neashi, it takes longer or more or less time to get their power to manifest. Now, that being said, you have the ability to add, material components or arcane gestures or whatever to your powers as a means of reducing the cost to purchase the power. And that's something that any Neash can do, but it, thematically it fits really well with the mage. But yeah, there's not really a lot of there's not material resource management that you have to do with those powers. The biggest thing that you're managing is time. I can't tell. I've seen it 3 or 4 times where somebody with the character Soleimane, the Temenvir that can turn into a flying squirrel. Everybody wants to turn into a flying squirrel in the middle of combat, and it takes 4 seconds, and that's all you can do for that 4 seconds, other than move around. And so that's again that timekeeping and the way that works. It takes a little bit of getting used to, and so as a game master, especially with new players, all of our players are new. It's my job to be like, hey, just so you know, you can do some really cool thematic stuff with what you're trying to do, and I think I see what you're trying to do, but you're going to take yourself out of the combat for 4 seconds, or for 4 phases. So just so you know,
right?
That.
Which, yeah, that's kind of sitting out for a few seconds, which that's turns at the table that can go on for a little bit of time. I think another thing that you might be getting at here, Mildred, is just how the characters are built and how much they can do and what roles they need to take on or could take on. One thing I'll say about that, when we built these particular pre-gen characters, we were using 15 character creation points, or CCPs. And we have since really asked ourselves the question, like, is that too much, right? Because that was the standard opening, everybody's going to play with 15 CCP characters. And those 10 pre-generated characters show you just how much you can get with 15 CCPs. And it's a lot. So we've been saying, okay, we might scale that back and recommend that we start with 10 or 12 CCPs so that things are a little tighter at the beginning and you don't have this diffusion of all these abilities you can do. It helps you focus a little bit more tightly and gives you room to grow, so that as you play the game and you accrue experience and you want to spend it to raise your character's abilities across wherever you want to focus that, right? It gives you places to go.
Yeah, to that point, we're looking at doing some sword and sorcery version conversions of other stuff for a system or an actual play that we're going to be participating with. And we started looking at, building 10 CCP characters, and they feel much more like a character class, right? That when you limit yourself to 10 CCPs to create your character, you end up much more tightly defined into a role. And so it is a feature of how many points you have to do it. And, we've done some things that I think are going to help take care of some of the what ended up feeling like a little bit of a power gaming aspect that ended up from the 15 CCPs. But I like Seth said, we may end up adjusting that number just to figure out how we want players to feel. And I would say at the end of the day, that's a player game master discussion, right? That the game master can just be like, hey, I want to play an 8 CCP game. And it's going to be very gritty. And that's good for, like, if you want to play a horror investigatory, like if you want to play Call of Cthulhu using our system, you can do that. And one of the ways you do that is you drop your CCPs down to 7 or 8. And now all of a sudden, everything is much, much harder. And so you end up with this bigger challenge. I'm very sorry. I do personally have to step off. I know that.
The final thing I was going to ask, because I know you've got your
Yeah.
time limit, is what do you guys have planned next when it comes to the Altered World experience? Now that the Beer and Pretzels kit is out in the wild.
So, kind of the next step is we're going to be updating. There'll be an update sent out through DriveThruRPG for anybody who's downloaded it once we adjust to this new rules that we're playtesting this week. And then I think the next step beyond that, as far as releases, is we're going to actually release a narrative setting agnostic SRD of just the mechanics. And that's going to go out under Creative Commons, and it'll be like anybody who wants to create a narrative setting to use our rule set, they'll be totally able to do so, and just on attribution basis only. And then in our pipeline, Seth, what do we have? 10 or something adventures that we're looking at writing, but we haven't actually started writing yet. Is that right?
Yeah, we put pen to paper on 2 of those, and the other 8, we've got some ideas. So each of the 10 pre-generated characters that you find in the Beer and Pretzels kit for Extraction Ostinato, each of those 10 is going to have their own kind of focused adventure, and hopefully tell a fun story through the lens of what they're about. So we've started doing one for Crutch the Morthai and Linda the Riaz.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And then, if all goes well, we'll have a little bit of lore to drop, working on some fiction pieces here and there, and hopefully that gets people engaged and interested and thinking about the characters they want to play and the stories they want to tell.
Yeah, I can get that, and I'll certainly be looking forward to how that will come about. But with that said, I do want to sincerely thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come all the way to my monastery. I know, and enjoy the madness that happens around here.
Oh, so glad you had us back.
Yep, and
yeah, thanks a lot.
Anytime you see fit to return, the door is always open. As I often say around here, drinking is not mandatory, but it is encouraged. And of course...
Well, we'll hold up our virtual glasses to that.
Yep. And of course, a sincere thanks goes out to everyone who took the time out of their schedule to come onto the show and enjoy the madness. And there'll be plenty more where that came from, as there always is here, on the open bar of the internet. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra. I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty, everybody.
Soy, yo la cuna, yo,